And welcome into another episode of Flyers Files on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin Durso and Haley Taylor-Simon here with you for another edition. And the Flyers with some positive results for a change. It was a kind of an interesting week the last time we did this, in the middle of a losing streak. Since then, they've played 4 games and they've got 3 wins. Haley, what do you think has been kind of the difference?
Honestly, I think it's just that team chemistry. I know that when I spoke to Bobby Brink a week back, he said that they still had a strong locker room, and you can definitely tell on the ice they do play as a team. I also think, Kevin, it comes with some consistency. We know what that first line is with Couturier centering and then Michkov and Konechny to the side. So I feel like that has been another beneficial factor. However, we cannot deny Sam Ersson's impact in net and how he just seems like the most confident version of himself.
Yeah, that was the first talking point I had, was Sam Ersson in particular. That this is the goalie that got people excited almost around this time last year, that started to string together some wins and good results. And I think really, it's funny that the first game of this whole sequence that we're really talking about was not close to his best by any stretch. It was, no pun intended, a truly wild game on Saturday against the Minnesota Wild when you have that many goals. And I think in particular, a lot of people would focus in on the one that ties the game at 5. It's a goal that Sam Ersson's just got to have. And I think he thinks that too, because his next 2 games after that were really representative of what he's known to do. He's so calm and poised in net, gets a shutout against Boston on the road, then follows it up with another really solid effort against St. Louis. Doesn't get the shutout. Looked like he was possibly on the way to one. It's one bad bounce that goes against him. But really, like, I highlight the save at the end of the game there, the one he makes on Braden Shen, is really like the difference maker. That's where he can be that kind of goalie. It's what makes me believe in him as a starter capable guy. And that's why, like, I had a conversation pretty recently in the midst of more than just Sam Ersson, the whole goalie picture, and kind of how there's this focus on the 2 19-year-olds that they drafted recently that, like, everybody's going to look forward to. I keep Sam Ersson in the picture constantly, though. Like, and I keep him in the picture as exactly what he was kind of behind Carter Hart last year, as a guy who, like, it's not a matter of trying to call him a starter or a backup. It's more just kind of hitting with the 1A, 1B thing. And, like, would I want Sam Ersson starting 40 games a year for me? Probably. Like, I can see that being very reasonable down the stretch. I don't know that I want him starting 60. I think that that's probably pushing it too far. And I think there's a lot of teams that would follow that path anyway, with any goaltender, not just somebody like Sam Ersson, who's still finding his footing to some degree. Like you saw that with the Boston Bruins, who had 2 really solid goalies, picked the guy who didn't end up winning the Vezina a couple years ago, that they're moving forward because he's younger and he's got probably more of a future in front of him long term. That's who they tied their long term future to. But they balanced out those starts. Linus Ullmark won a Vezina without necessarily starting 65 games in a season. He started a balanced number of games. Jeremy Swayman was a perfect complement. And that's what I think Sam Ersson can be as a goaltender. And I kind of just wonder now, and this is the question I want to pitch to you, is kind of where this goes from here, because now they have still an interesting situation involved with Alexei Kolosov now part of this rotation. And you got to get those guys starts, but Sam Ersson's playing so well, it's hard to figure out where exactly you give him the break too. So how do you kind of go about this without falling into the same trap as last year, where he's playing all the time?
That's a good question. And I think that it comes with just knowing that you cannot burn Ersson out. John Tortorella has talked about this numerous times, that Ersson was played too much. So if you have a back-to-back, maybe consider putting in Kolosov. Or you know what? If you think that the Flyers can match up well against another team, put in the backup. I think that you have to trust your backup goalie in these situations. Ersson cannot play every single game. So you have to look for those games where you're like, you know what? This will give Ersson a nice break, and this will allow for potentially, if it is Kolosov that continues to stay up in that position, an opportunity to take control of the net.
Yeah, and I just kind of wonder, exactly like you're saying, I wonder where that is, because if you wait for the next back-to-back, it's the end of the month when they, ironically, when they play St. Louis again. But like waiting that long to utilize one of these 2 guys is not going to be the answer. I don't feel like you're learning anything about the other guys, and whether or not the backup situation is resolved per se. Like, somewhere in there, you've got to get a guy in there. And I think there was a lot of attention on maybe somewhere during the course of this week, Kolosov would play again, probably, because John Tortorella already said that whenever Ersson doesn't play next, it's going to be Kolosov. We know that much. But the when is really a big question. And now that you've seen Ersson shut out the Bruins, win another game against the Blues, giving up just one, I kind of get at least from my vantage point, I get the sense that Ersson's going against Boston, and that's another opportunity. And then they don't play until the following Tuesday on the road. And there is like a built-in break for Ersson to not get overworked per se. How do you navigate that part of it where it's like, you know what, like I totally get the part where you want to string together positive results, and Ersson's that guy right now. He's won every game that you have. He's gotten the win in every game that you've won this season. It's not like you're still going back to, I believe I looked this up earlier today, that the last time they won a game with a backup goalie was Felix Sandstrom in goal against Ottawa on March 2nd. That's the last game that they actually got a win with the backup. And like it's that balance again, where it's like balancing, trying to string together some wins with also the curiosity. Like to me, I'm curious about Kolosov. I want to see Kolosov more. I've seen a little bit of Fedotov, and I kind of think that they're going to find a way to get him playing in the minors in some capacity at some point. Kolosov's the guy who's here, and you've already made it clear that he's the next guy in line. So I'm curious to see him again, and I kind of just wonder if that curiosity takes over at some point in place of trying to win a game per se. I mean, do you sense that, not do you sense it, but like, do you allow that to happen? Do you allow the curiosity to be more important because you need to find out about this guy versus I just want a couple of wins? That's the thing that John Tortorella's got to balance, I think.
Yeah, and there's no correct answer to that one, right? I think people are going to be curious about him no matter what. However, I do want to point out that it wasn't until kind of recently that there was this balance between the backup and starting goalie. I feel like even years back, the starting goalie played a majority of the games, and that's just the nature of how it was. So I don't think you're putting too much on Ersson, especially if you're having those breaks. However, I do feel like sprinkling in a couple games here and there with the backup is beneficial. I think that there's a lot of emphasis right now on, what are the Flyers going to do about their goalie situation? And that is a valid statement to make because it is so fluid. Obviously, no one would have expected this to be the situation a year ago today. Crazy how, things have just changed, with that. But I think for this team, they're still in a rebuild. So you have to at least look at the mentality of, okay, let's try out the younger guys. Let's go try out Kolosov in net, see how he does, maybe against a competitive team. You need to put these players in situations where they might face a team like the Boston Bruins again, where they might face a team, I know they haven't played them yet, like the New Jersey Devils, who are doing great in the Metropolitan. You need to put these backups in positions because let's go say down the road, you're trying to fight for a playoff spot and Ersson, he's worn out. You might have to depend on your backup goalie. And I hate to be that blunt. I don't think the Flyers are going to make the playoffs. And I don't, coming from the sense of a rebuild, I don't think it'd be beneficial for them to make it. However, you need to develop these guys, especially these younger players. And in Kolosov's case, why not throw him in against the Boston Bruins? I doubt that will happen. However, I want to propose a question. Why not?
Absolutely. And that's what's kind of outweighing it for me is if you're trying to win as many games as possible, and I know that that's from a player's perspective and a coach's perspective, that's always the goal, is to try to win as much as possible. So that's where the usage of Ersson comes from. And I get that. But when you are in the middle of a rebuild, that's exactly where my head's at. I need to know, especially if you came in with clearly defined roles. Ersson's the number one, he's the primary starter, and we know who the backup is already. Like let's say Fedotov gave you better in the first 3 games anyway, so you kept it the way that it was. It doesn't have to change. You're going to put him in the right spots, but while Ersson's on a roll, you ride the hot hand. I don't think there's anything we'd need to talk about with it because it would be established roles. Kolosov's in the minors. It is what it is. Because you're still trying to find some things out and Fedotov hasn't been as great and that backup isn't solidified, you kind of need to figure out what you've got in Kolosov, especially while he's here, because I think that question is still lingering, whether he stays for the full season or not. And because of that, like, I need to know that information now rather than find it out when he goes and plays, if he goes back and plays in the KHL or something. Then you're also back to square one where it's, well, Fedotov's the backup, and what do you do from there? And because right now it's pretty obvious there's a clear trust issue there, just like there was at the end of the year, where basically John Tortorella, in no certain terms, said, "I can't trust Cal Peterson, I can't trust Felix Sandstrom. I've got to play Ersson." That's the way that it was going, and there's a danger to doing this so early in the season. I think it's solved your problem to this point, and I think they also had that balance, at the start of this run. They had that balance when they played Minnesota, and it was like, okay, that was a natural spot for Ersson to play. And then he got hot. And it was after you played that natural rotation, well, the shutout in Boston, now a win against St. Louis. Boston's on the schedule again. You got to figure, like, that's why I keep coming back to it. I think you got to figure it's going to be Ersson's game, because that's just the way that John Tortorella operates. I just hope that it's not beyond that. I think that you need to either you do say why not and play Kolosov against Boston, or you say it next week and play him in Carolina, because he's got to get a start somewhere. And as much as I could circle a game like San Jose on the schedule so you don't have to wait until the back-to-back, that's still a lot of action in a row for Ersson, and I just don't like that path this early in the season. I want to see these other guys. I sure hope Kolosov's got to start in the next 2 games somewhere. That's just where I'm at with it. But I want to shift gears and go to the wins themselves, because it's been a positive, right? Like, if we would have talked about this week the same as last week, where they were, the way it was shaping up, 6-game losing streak, it was kind of easy to fall into the early trap that is where, well, this is just the way the whole season's going to go. And now they've put together a couple of games that look more like the team we saw last year, at least for right now, and it has at least produced some positive results. So because of that, at least you're out of the basement a little bit. You're not out of the bottom 10 by any stretch in the league, but you've put together some results, 3 wins in 4 games. And as you start to look to build upon that, and like, I think it's easy. One of the things I think that's easy to forget is that this team that was in the playoff race the entire season, that was there until the final game of the season, started the year 5-7-1 last year through 13 games. They're through 11 so far this season. So they're coming up on that number. And if you would have asked me a week ago if at 13 games or at 11 games, they would be on the cusp of what they were 13 games in last year, I would have said, no way. I couldn't find a win. Maybe the Montreal game was the one on paper that felt good. That's the one they lost, ironically. And the other 3, I would have told you, I don't know. These other teams have wins. They're successful so far. They've got something that the Flyers don't seem to have, but they've turned it into wins. And I think one of the key reasons they have is, well, there's 2 key reasons to me. One is the defensive zone play and blocking shots, but the other part is that it feels, and this kind of goes hand in hand, they're getting contributions from up and down the lineup.
Yeah. I mean, kind of not to be negative, because I feel like that's where I'm heading. You're going to have wins out of these 82 games. I don't change my opinion on how I feel about this team and where I see this team going. I think last season, again, it was a fluky season. I think that the Flyers are going to have some good wins, okay? That's normal with any hockey team. I mean, the San Jose Sharks had a win the other night. So, again, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Yes, they had a huge win against the Wild, a lot of scoring, but they also let in a lot of goals. You had a shutout win against Boston. It was a good game. I'll leave it at that. St. Louis last night, the amount of times that the Flyers had opportunity around net but couldn't capitalize when they only were leading by 1 goal, it was a problem. And if you look at that game, especially last night's game versus the St. Louis Blues, you could see how sloppy it was on the Flyers side. Despite the fact that they won, you're going to have ugly losses. You cannot forget and you cannot diminish the amount of turnovers, the just amount of bad plays on the ice. I mean, how about Michkov not getting a couple of shifts? I mean, you have to take it for how it is. They're going to win games. No doubt about it. No team has lost all 82 games, okay? However, it's the way that they're winning that does strike concern with me still. Boston's the exception. Defense was on point. They played a great game. I'll give them that. Ersson looks phenomenal. Last night, Ersson looks good too. 20 saves, not bad. However, Jamie Drysdale on the power play unit, still don't like how he looks. Or penalty killed, my bad. The point is, these players, they're not they're not giving what they gave last season. Ryan Paling, after a game, said that. He said it's not up to their standards. Obviously, the players know that they're not playing this great hockey despite the outcome. And I still believe that this is a bottom 10 team in the NHL, and nothing's going to really impact that. And unless they make a trade or they do something.
Yeah, the way I see it, like I agree with you from the on paper perspective. I felt this way last year, and I'll kind of follow the same path because like I can see them splitting the next 2 games potentially and getting to the same record they had through 13 games this season, just like last season. I can see that happening. But I'm trying to like be realistic about it. And I was all through last season where they lost that game to San Jose. San Jose hadn't gotten a win all season. They lost that game. They are 5-7-1 at that point, and it's really easy to look and say, well, then this is what they are. And they reeled off 5 straight wins after that, and it made the record look better, and it put them back into kind of the wild card-ish territory. And I wasn't like, you can ask the question, are they good at that point? And I wasn't willing to fully go there yet. And I don't know that I think like to me, like ironically, the time that I finally felt comfortable saying they're probably a playoff team last year, and then they ultimately weren't, was after they beat Boston with 3 weeks to go in the season. That was finally the moment I'm like, that kind of win after the trade deadline, after you're kind of still trying to go through injuries, trying to go through this guy's not here anymore, this situation. I think they've convinced me. There's only 11 games left, and they're in one of those spots. I think I have to admit they're probably making it, and then they still didn't anyway. But that's how long last season it took for me to kind of really be fully committed to, you know what, maybe they're a better team than I want to give them credit for after all of this time. So I'm right there with you, kind of like I don't go that far so easily. That being said, like it's kind of I'm right at that same crossroads with them where it's like, I don't know. They could reel off a bunch of wins in a row the way that they did last year at a certain point because they have some positive results to build on, even if the process isn't there. And at the same time, I sit there and I look at every example that you just gave and say, that's the reason they won't put it together is because the process isn't there and it's still disjointed and they're still missing out on opportunities and they still can't score and things like that. So like there's enough reasons to say it's not going to go somewhere, but there's also reason to believe as I watch teams that I want to believe look really good and can handle it, I think the perfect example is Minnesota when they played Minnesota. And even though that was not the defensive standard that they like to have, I think there's an element where Minnesota came in with no regulation losses and saw the Flyers on a 6-game losing streak and just a little bit thought, we don't need our best in this game. We don't need to have the best to find a way to pull this one out. And they nearly did without it. But I think that was one rare example where a team didn't, played the same way against the Flyers that a lot of teams did early on last year, where it was, this is an easy one. We can go in and find a way to win. And you find out, no, it's not quite like that. You still need to play to your standard as well. I just don't know how long that's going to last. Like, I think you're catching teams in weird spots. Like Boston's going to figure it out at some point to be better than what they are at the moment. As we're recording this, I've got the global series is on starting today, and I'm watching. And Florida's a good team, so I'm not surprised that they're putting on a good performance. But I'm looking, and I feel like I don't recognize this Dallas team losing a game the way that they're losing this one right now. And it's like, this is just weird territory. Some teams just early in the year have really weird performances that don't make a lot of sense, and the Flyers can kind of feast on that without their best because they'll do the things that maybe teams don't try to do until March and do the blocking of shots all over the place and just find a way to grind out a game because their goaltending is sharp at the moment and things like that. Like as that wears on, it's going to be different. So I think you hit the nail on the head. Like with that, it's great now and you're getting some positive results, but I don't know that it's holding up. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised either way. I just don't sense through 11 games the cohesiveness that they need to have. I am encouraged by certain players lately that I think are starting to find a little something that can be built upon. I think that 2 guys in particular, I think that have had, that I certainly will call standouts in the St. Louis game, Garnet Hathaway and Ryan Paling, I think had a game finally that resembled them from last season. And if they can put it together more, then you can maybe boost the expectations. That's the game that I wasn't expecting near as much this year from those two. And they had one of those in that particular instance. I hope that Bobby Brink scoring unlocks something for him, just like the other night Tyson Forrester scoring. I hope that unlocks something for him. These are guys that need to find a way to make it happen. In particular, the guys like Brink and Forrester and Joel Farabee, who had the empty netter and had an assist on Brink's game winner. These are the guys that I think need to put it together. And if you can get those contributions up and down the lineup, like right now, you brought up Michkov and the turnover and getting sat down for a couple of shifts. He's finally having a string of games where it's not all being put together, and it's not, it's time for the learning experience, and it's time to experience what it's like to be an NHLer, and that every night you're not just going to go out and put up points. He's finding that out. So now it's time for, if you're going to win games, it's going to have to be because other guys find a way to step up. And I'm hoping that some of those guys have unlocked something by maybe scoring a goal somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and you said a lot during that, so I just want to respond to a couple of things. One, if people want to watch a team and kind of see what it's like to play good, clean hockey, a team that's good at rebounding, watch the Winnipeg Jets. I feel like that is the prime example. I know they're leading the NHL right now. However, what they're doing around the net, how they are defensively, is what you strive to have hockey teams do. So I just want to put that out there. So Winnipeg, that's like the example of a team that's actually playing good, clean hockey. Two, in last night's game, do I think that Hathaway and Paling were these standouts? They had a couple good shifts, obviously that sequence with the goal, but I wouldn't say any of them stood out to me. I saw just way too many sloppy plays on the ice, if I'm being honest with you, Kev. And it's one of those things where, again, I'm happy for these players individually that they're having better moments. Bobby Brink's goal, good for him. However, do I think they all had a good game? No. And I think that you can have good moments in a game, and that's a positive and treading towards the right direction. But I feel like there is just not enough consistency I'm seeing. Now, defensively, again, Ristolainen, I brought him up before, had a couple good hits last night. Wasn't impressive. Nick Seeler, on the other hand, was impressive. He took a block shot from Braden Shen last night, and that puck was coming at him hard, and he had a little bit of a tough time getting up. But Nick Seeler is a tough guy that puts his body out there, and that's what you need to see from this Philadelphia team is the same exact energy that Seeler has. Do I think Sam Ersson had a good game last night? Absolutely. But it's really difficult for me to look at some of these offensive players and say, oh, yeah, they had a great game. Because the reality is to have a great game would mean to have good, clean passes consistently, to not turn over the puck as many times, to have good spatial and positioning on the ice. Were there times where they didn't do that? Absolutely. And that's with any player during any game. But I needed the majority of the game to have that consistency, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And standout was probably the wrong word on my part with it. It's more just having those flashes where it's like, okay, you put together a really good
Well, it
shift and it
wasn't
leads
you.
to
I
a
see it
goal.
all over social media.
No, I get it. And I'm just looking for, like, what I was looking for in that sense was, and with all due respect to Ryan Paling, I don't want where Ryan Paling plays in the lineup. I don't want him to be considered one of the 3 stars of the game when it's all said and done. You would hope that everybody else has contributed in a way, like sure, we all wish that a line could click the way that the Konechny, Couturier, Michkov line clicked in Saturday's game, and that guys put up 4 or 5 points in a game and contribute multiple goals, and everybody wants to have that happen. I think, to your point, what really comes into play is they can have that game on occasion and go out and put up 7 goals. They came in, they had played 2 home games before where they had just 1 goal on home ice. They had gone to Washington and really just had to put it all up in the second half of that game just to make it look like a game again. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, after scoring, what would that turn out to be? That's 5 or 4 goals over their previous 3 at that point, put up 7. And then now, again, hold for like that 2-goal outburst at the end of the Montreal game that was really just a 4-1 game for most of it. Hold for that, put up 1 goal for the majority of that game, 2 in Boston, where 1's an empty netter, and then 2 in against St. Louis. is there a chance that all of a sudden the Boston game this Saturday turns into another one where it's like, oh, now it's going to be a 6-2 game and they find a way to score in bunches? Because that's the inconsistency of this lineup sometimes, where you've got like I think one of the interesting parts of this lineup is that it feels weird to be talking about this subject, because I think there's always that natural crutch that you get a Michkov level player who has the skill and the goals are going to follow at some point, right? Like, it's just going to happen. And then you see what happens in the adjustment process. He plays his 9th, 10th, 11th career game, doesn't have any points through those 3 because you're going to hit certain periods where you just don't put up points. And when he doesn't, somebody else is going to have to. And then I think you see the struggle there, where it's a little too inconsistent from other guys on the offensive side. I love your point about Nick Seeler, because like Nick Seeler is a guy who I think embodies what some of these forwards need to become. And there's even guys who need to become this that I guess you could call this by contract status, if you will, but like I've been looking at this season, or I'm looking at this season anyway, that I want to find guys who are here who are irreplaceable. That I want to be able to say that about like if I'm not having the conversation that we have seemingly every year about, let's say, Joel Farabee, or about, this year, like now that Tyson Forster's been around for a full season and this is his second, maybe he becomes part of this. I don't want to have conversations about, well, they should just try to find a way to trade a guy like that because he's just what he is. Like, I don't want to have that conversation. I want to be able to have the conversation that we have about, or that at least you can feel like you can have about, say, Owen Tippett or about Travis Konechny. And even then, like Tippett, I'm still looking for that next gear this year so far. I'm still waiting for it, but he's got a contract that says, he's pretty much a part of the core. I'm worried about the guys who don't have the contracts and go there. And it's crazy to me to think about how Nick Seeler was a guy who was kind of a throwaway piece a few years back that has become that irreplaceable part of the lineup. That, like, I mean, like, I'm sure that if they could, they would throw goalie equipment on him and let him use that to block all the shots he's blocking, because they can't really afford to lose him out of the lineup. We saw that at the start of the year where he missed some time. And now that he's back, he just goes out and in that, like the shot, one of the shots you're talking about among the many that he blocks throughout the course of a game, like the one you're talking about on Shen. It's at the times when things get a little disjointed and they're a little out of sorts in the defensive zone, that he steps up and almost just throws his body at it. Let it hit me wherever. He took one, and it wasn't like it was in, the typical areas. It wasn't like you just get out and put your shin guards together and let it hit you. He's going out and getting hit up high, getting hit in the arm, getting hit near the hand, anything. I'm going to block this shot because it's what the team needs at this moment, and I don't care about anything else. And I know that, I know he got a day off from practice today. The expectation is he's going to play.
Well,
Doesn't matter. I took the positive as that he spoke last night. Usually you're not speaking after a game if you're dealing with something a little more. But this is just who he is. And I love the fact that on top of it, and it's kind of an overlooked part of Saturday's game, with exactly the point I kind of started with, the top line putting together what feels like a perfect game, or feels like a game where you get so many contributions. It was great to see Nick Seeler score a goal in that game too, just for the sake of having an offensive contribution. This is a guy who last year scored 1 goal, and it came in the outdoor game, no less. The guy hasn't scored a goal indoors since like March the year prior, and finally gets a goal. Comes, I think it was like 2, like, because he missed so much time to start the season too. It's pretty much, I think it was like his second or third game back, and he's got a goal. And it's like, that's great. Contribute that way too, by jumping into a play and having that sense as well. I really hope that, and it's still a little early because he's only played so many games, I hope that his presence alongside Jamie Drysdale has a positive impact in the long run. I understand adjustment processes, and I understand trying to get it figured out. I just hope it has that positive impact in the long run, because Seeler is like among their most consistent defensemen. And it fell right in line. Seeler kind of being back in the lineup fell right in line with Cam York coming out of the lineup with an injury. York was probably arguably the most consistent defenseman they've had to this point in the season, and Sealer's becoming like one of those guys who's coming right up there with him. And having those two guys be stabilizers, I think, is important for everybody else to be at their best. And you just need to start seeing more. Like you're right. Winning 3 and 4 feels great to say, but it's not winning 3 and 4 with the most convincing fashion. It's been a lot of good goaltending, and it's been just getting a goal at the right time, more or less, that has kind of been the difference so far. And if they can start to string together more positive results without that, then we can maybe change our tune a little bit. But right now, I think we're stuck with we're in the same kind of mindset at this point as we've been because of where it kind of stands at this point. But I hope that some slight positive results leads to relaxation a little bit, like being able to not be gripping the stick too tight, leads to some offense for guys who need it, and leads to some wins for a team that felt like they could use it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now there's a test against Boston tomorrow, and
Mhm.
Eric Johnson's coming up on his 1,000th NHL career game, so he's 5 games away from that.
Yeah,
So
it's supposed to happen on the road if he plays from here on
yeah,
out, right?
exactly. Yeah, 5 games. So, I mean, that's if he's in the lineup, right? But I mean, there is a lot of veterans on this team that are going to help these younger players out again, which is why it's beneficial to have him not always in the lineup, but just to have him around enough just to help them grow. But again, it's so early in the season. If it was maybe like January and things were still treading this way about certain players, I could understand the frustration. But you're not even 1 month into the season yet. Give the guys a little bit more time to see what they're capable of. But I'm not worried about players like an Owen Tippett. I'm not worried about players like a Farabee at all. I mean, yes, it's frustrating, but at the same time, look at the games that were played and get back to me on when did any player on the Philadelphia Flyers have that much, scoring chances and ability just due to the sloppiness of the nature of the game. And unfortunately, when you don't have the puck in the offensive zone, you're not going to be able to score. And most of the time, they were in their defensive zone just due to the nature of who they were playing. So give us some more
Exactly.
time, and I'm sure the guys will find success on the ice.
Yeah, and I think a great place to, like, leave it for this week also, like, to your point, I can go look at the standings right now and find 25 teams, I think it is, or something of that sort, that are separated by 5 points. Like, everybody log jams up in the middle of the standings in some way early on, and then you start to separate those teams that are really good from the ones that still have some work to do, or that are, that are going to be sellers at the deadline versus the ones that are going to probably be the buyers at the deadline. That separates itself out really starting this month, really starting in November as you go towards Thanksgiving, and then start to build towards the midpoint of the season. We're gonna get to the end of this month, and all of a sudden they got a lot of games this month. By the way, they have 14. So by the time we're done and we're talking about past the quarter point of the season and starting to get closer and closer to the halfway point, we'll have more answers to a lot of these questions. It's just a work in progress, and yeah, as you start to get towards that, like we said, Boston tomorrow at home, that closes out a run of 4 out of 5 on home ice. And then the Flyers will hit the road for a stretch of games. They'll hit the road for 3 in a row, all kind of toward the south portion of the country. They'll go to Carolina first, then Tampa, then Florida before coming back home for another nice run of home games in a short period of time. So it's going to be a lot of action we're going to get to see. Obviously, I mean, we get a front row seat for that type of stuff, so we'll get to watch some more and see if there's any changes to our opinions on how this team looks. But that's where we'll leave you for this episode of Flyers Files on 97.3 ESPN. For Haley Taylor Simon, I'm Kevin Durso. Thanks for joining us.